to try to understand what it is that's happening with the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy strategies, you know?
Hmm.
And it seems that it was a very common narrative that the Federal Reserve had lost control of pretty much everything. Not only their monetary policy, they lost control of inflation, they lost control of it all. And I am now under the belief that from a very long time ago, everything that we have experienced all the way through the pandemic was very much set up, controlled, and done on purpose by the Federal Reserve so that they could have themselves positioned in where they are today. And ultimately, to put it in a nutshell, the Federal Reserve prior to the pandemic had completely run out of monetary policy. They could no longer effectively stimulate the economy with the dropping of interest rates. They had run into what they referred to as the lower bound of zero. And when that took place, they knew that they were going to have to do something different, that they were going to have to do something that was going to be able to get them to be able to put their Fed funds rate up at a higher level. When it was at zero, no monetary policy. Today, it's at 5.25%, a little over 5%. They now have their monetary policy back. They essentially got their ammo back, and it was the pandemic that did it. I have speeches, I have statements from it, and I have the pretty much timeline on how this all went down. And I am now convinced that the pandemic saved the Federal Reserve, straight up.
Now you're speaking. You could freely speak here tonight. You don't have to worry about censorship. Do you think, in my kind of deformed mind, when I kept saying in 2018 and 2019, we're in a major financial situation, and the only way I could see with the repo markets and everything they were doing, the only way I could see them fixing this problem is by pulling the trigger on the pandemic. Do you think? Okay, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I mean, it's, there's a lot of things that were taking place prior to the pandemic. There really was. And it's you can pinpoint and you can come down to all kinds of little situations, but really it's the Federal Reserve statements themselves that I look at.
Hmm.
And when I see something like this one right here, and those who have been following me on my channel know that I go over this speech so many times that I practically know this thing by heart now. But it's monetary policy strategies for a low neutral interest rate world. And this speech was given November 30th of 2018. And this is what he said in this speech. Today, we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. That is, the short-term real interest rate consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
The problem they needed to solve was that the inflation was persistently too low rather than too high. See, they had run out of monetary policy. The neutral interest rate, and this is kind of hard to understand, but the neutral interest rate is the interest rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. So when the Federal Reserve has their Fed funds rate at neutral, that's it. They're like even keel. No increase, no decrease, just perfectly even. Well, that neutral interest rate was somewhere around 0 to 1.25%. They don't know exactly where it was, but it was so low that stimulating the economy became almost impossible because dropping the interest rates below the neutral interest rate became impossible because they would hit the lower bound of zero. So this was the problem that they faced, was that inflation was too low, right? They couldn't fight inflation. They couldn't even get inflation. They had quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 and failed to produce the inflation scenario. They got inflation in the housing market. They got it
Yeah.
in the bond market, stock market. They got it in all the stuff that you borrow money, because that's essentially what ended up happening. You print up all this money and it goes into the banking system. And unless that money is borrowed or lent into the system, then it just stays in the banking system. And so it never chases the goods and services like a lot of people would think that it would, just because it was simply printed, right? But that's really what ended up happening, is that the Federal Reserve failed to get the inflation scenario that they were looking for. And it was the pandemic, again, that gave them the ability to then, well, it wasn't the Fed who really shut down the economy. It was the fiscal policies coming from, the government once they shut down everybody told everybody not to go to work and all that other stuff. Then they issued out all this checks, all the stimulus checks to try and save everybody. That, in combination with that severing of the supply chain, is really what caused the inflation to take place. The severing of the supply chain is what kept that inflation lasting. You can even see it in a lot of their statements that it was the supply side of things that has helped bring inflation back down. But now the supply side of things is no longer going to be effective as far as bringing inflation down any further, because it's pretty much been reestablished, right? So the supply side is back. Maybe not so much on the manufacturing, but definitely on the distribution side of things. So what's going to come from here is another round of inflation, in my opinion, but not necessarily due to like money printing, but due to the fact that we have a slowdown in the actual manufacturing of goods coming from places like China and the rest of the globe. So if these items don't come to the United States, well, then there's less items to sell. Supply demand imbalances begin to take place. And again, you start having inflation start to flare back up again. And this is something that I feel could be a real possibility. That, again, this is kind of like the bullwhip effect, another one of my theories that I follow.
All right. So around that time, the 2018 speech, I remember making these. I think they're still up. I don't know if they were taken down for medical misinformation, but I still remember making videos that we're going to go into, they're going to push us into negative interest rates. I remember that. And I believe, this is again my conspiracy theory clouded judgment, where they want to go into negative interest, they want to go into negative interest rates, and they're going to start punishing borrowers, or no, rewarding borrowers, and punishing, you know what I'm saying? So, and punishing savers, so to say. Well, people with savings will be punished. And that was already in 2017, 2018, and 2019. There was already German banks reporting that if you have more than 100,000 or 85,000 in your bank account, they're actually in a negative position where they're actually charging you every month for having your money in their bank. Well, and I'm not talking about bank fees. They're charging a percentage of your overall amount that you have. So I was kind of hinging at this time towards negative rates, because I still remember Trump coming up and talking about, I would love to get paid for money I borrow, and those kind of speeches. And I still remember that. And I was kind of hinging towards, they were going to go negative. They're going to go negative. They must go negative if they want to keep this going longer. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the negative interest rate is kind of an interesting thing, because like, if you think about like, if you go back and you look through history in the countries that have used a negative interest rate or have gone negative on some of their bond yields and stuff like that, and their central banks, they're like the Fed funds rate, essentially, the equivalents of other nations, those nations haven't done well, right? They didn't like exactly succeed in that process. Donald Trump did come out and say that. He did come out and say the Fed should be printing money and they should take interest rates into negative territory. He said it straight up, right? And now I think about like some of the things that were taking place at the time and the reasons why he said that, right? Because it's not necessarily that Donald Trump truly wanted negative interest rates. Like, yeah, the idea, the statements that he made, like get paid to borrow money. I mean, those were all true statements that he came out with, but really ultimately what he was trying to do was he was trying to lower the inflation expectation, because when you lower the inflation expectation, you will raise the real interest rates. At that exact time that he was making those statements, the Federal Reserve was trying to raise their interest rates. They had the Fed funds rates up around 2.5%, and the markets were flipping out. They were pissed, right? And the Fed knew they couldn't raise rates any more than this, right? But they still wanted to raise the real interest rate. So the only way it could really happen is if you could lower the inflation expectation. Because for those who kind of are confused by this, if you can imagine, if you are an investor who is anticipating on getting a 2% return, and you have an inflation expectation of 1%, you will get a 1% return, right? Mm-hmm. What you anticipate you getting after the inflation, right? So if you can lower your inflation the inflation expectation, you will raise the real interest rate to 2%, what the investor anticipates getting after inflation. So by lowering the inflation expectation, you will raise the real interest rates. That's what Donald Trump was truly trying to do at the time, was to lower the inflation expectation and raise those real interest rates. And it was actually in cahoots with the Federal Reserve, who was trying to raise interest rates at the time. So to me, that was a game that they were playing together. At least that's from what I have gathered on it. And now, even if you were to go into negative rates, like this is the problem that I see with, like, even politicians talking about negative interest rates and stuff like that, is that if you have cash in the system, it's going to make it very difficult because people are just going to pull their cash out, right?
Right.
I have a negative interest rate when you can just pull cash out.
And that's why they could go digital. That's why they could go digital so that you can't pull the cash out, so there's no runoff on the monetary system.
That's exactly why they're going to go digital, and that's the main reason that they're going digital. See, a lot of people want to think it's about tracking and tracing and all this other stuff. It's not. It's about taking interest rates into negative territory. That's really what this is all about. But you can't take interest rates into negative territory so long as you have the cash. So you have to have a digital currency in the system. See, tracking, tracing, all that other stuff, yes, that's going to happen too. And so, to be worried about that is definitely legitimate. But that's not the reason. The reason is negative interest rates and being able to take those negative interest rates into that kind of territory. The problem with having cash in the system and people hoarding that cash or pulling it out of the banking system means that they're now no longer have their wealth inside the banking system. The banking system begins to deteriorate. So it has to stay within the banking system. But the only way you can do that is to make sure that people don't want to use the cash. The only way you can really do that is to charge a fee to withdraw or deposit the cash that would be the same as the negative interest rates that's applied to the digital currency that you already have in the banking system, making the cash useless to hoard, right? So now you go to the store to try and use cash, and you get charged an extra fee for using cash. Black market doesn't want to use cash because they go to the bank and it's a nuisance to try and deposit it with them. You can't go anywhere with the cash because everything is now tied up into the central bank digital currencies, and people by the end of a generation would just simply not be using it. Now, that's kind of what I think is going to happen. It's going to be like a long time span. I don't think it's going to happen instantly. But if you bring on a crisis scenario and you tell people that they can download an app and get all this free money to go and buy food with, they'll do it. Mm-hmm. Like, they'll do it right now. Like, they'll just right now,
Now, what are the odds of a parallel economy sprouting up between me and you and other people watching this? What's to stop us from creating our own parallel economy with maybe using silver coins and kind of like creating a value of legal tender that we believe this 1 ounce silver coin is worth, let's say, $20 or $30 in the open market, and I'm willing to trade for that value. What's to stop us from creating a parallel economy?
Well, nothing, but we have to consciously do it. We have to consciously make this decision that we are not going to use the paper currency, but use the silver coins between us. Here's the issue with it, right? Now, take, for example, I'm a merchant, okay? And you have cash in one hand and a gold coin in the other. And you come to me and you say, hey, which one are you going to accept? And I tell you, I'll take both. Which one are you going to really give me? The cash or the gold? I'm a merchant now trying to sell you an item.
Mm-hmm.
Which one are you going to give me? Are you going to give me your cash or are you going to give me your gold coin?
I'd rather give you the cash than the gold coin.
Right. You know what this is called? Gresham's Law, right? And this will happen every time. Gresham's Law is when bad money chases out good. And so long as you have bad money in circulation, trying to introduce a good currency means that people will hoard it, just like you would hoard your gold coin as opposed to trying to give it to me as a merchant, right? So now this is the same situation that will happen every single time, no matter whether it's Bitcoin, gold, or anything else out there. If you have a good currency, it will not be introduced into a bad currency system until you have something that's called Thayer's Law. Thayer's Law is the exact opposite of Gresham's Law, and it's not a competition. It's actually a complementary law that says once the current system has completely failed, then you can introduce a good currency like the gold or the Bitcoin or something else into it. But you have to have the current system completely fail. So Gresham's Law will prevent that scenario from happening. But if we make a conscious choice, I want to do work for silver. I want to pay in silver. I want to work with people who do this. And you build the network of people who can do it. Yes, you can. Absolutely.
That's just something I think will eventually happen. You'll end up picking up even fuel through different various black market areas and fuel. I think a lot of stuff will end up going black market that you could relatively go to the corner store and buy will ending up in a black market scenario. I just, that's what I see happening. So yeah, man, you're on fire tonight, buddy. You got you got a message and a half. You got lots of information. And guys, if you're just joining us, this is Uneducated Economist. I'm going to give you guys his YouTube channel here. And there he is right there, Uneducated Economist. You guys could subscribe to him. I'll leave a link in the description in the live chat right here. And going to copy that. And congratulations, you're sitting at 132,000 followers.
Man, just amazing. I mean, I never thought in a million years I would have a YouTube channel that ever had like 130 subscribers, let alone 130,000 of them, man. You know, it's just amazing. Like ever since that day that you asked me to come on your show, that was the very first interview that anybody had ever asked of me, you know, and I was just blown away. Like, I couldn't believe that I was like, somebody actually wanted my opinion, you know, and I have to thank you, man, because like it was after that it really just like my channel really started to just snowball. All kinds of things started to happen. And you know, I was nervous. Like I almost backed out. I almost didn't think I could do it. Like I was like, I can't do the interview, you know.
Oh, but you know, I'm an easy guy, right? I'm not hard hitting, right? I'm just, hey, what's going on? It's Mike in the night. But that was Trends in the Housing Market you came on back in 2014, 2015.
Yeah, it was a long time. It was like 5 years ago or something like that. And you know, and it wasn't you, it was me. I was the one who was nervous about doing it. I didn't know if I could like, you know, be on camera and, you know, do the interview and be like live and all that other stuff. But it was after that is just like my channel just really started to grow and snowball after that. And I can't thank you enough for that. You know?
Yeah, no, you worked hard and you did what you had. You got the message out. You were seeking the truth is what you were doing the whole time, is looking for and when I first saw you, I said right away, okay, this guy's not lying. This guy has no angle. This guy is for real, and I said, hey, this guy's gonna come. Unfortunately, I'm in censorship blanketed territory here in Canada. We actually have very thick censorship, layers of censorship here in Canada, and if we're not partnered with YouTube, we're gonna have all these partnerships. We're just kind of dead in the water. There's a couple of Canadian YouTubers that are doing well, but I believe a lot of them have been compromised. If you look at the dates their channel came about, the timing was just perfect, and a lot of it is post-dictions and basically sensationalizing headlines and all that stuff. And I'm not saying anything bad about anyone. I'm just saying you can kind of see this controlled information distribution that's happening. And like I bet you see this all the time, Simon, when you're scrolling through or you're going through news headlines or you're looking at a headline on a paper while you're walking out of a convenience store and wait, housing, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, wait a minute. This was happening 7 years ago. Why are they talking about this today? This could have been solved 7 years ago. This is what I call controlled information distribution, because information gets recycled, but they're bringing stuff up and making a big deal about the stuff, which is fine, but it could have been solved 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. That's the part I don't understand, is why are they bringing... Can you help me out with this? What's the deal with this?
I mean, as far as like when and the timing of information, like this is something that I'm dealing with right now upon my channel with the credible threat theories that I have. Now, the credible threat theory that I have is like they will put out information to get the markets to behave in a way that is as if they had already done something. Like right now, everybody believes that the Fed has pivoted, right? Like there's this pivot coming. They're going to be dropping interest rates, all this other stuff. Fed hasn't done anything, but the market's totally rallied off the news, right? So this is the credible threat theory that's happening out there. So when it comes to like the news that's out there, the media, it is very much like guiding the sheep, you know, and you really have to read between the lines. You have to do a lot of research and understanding that, you know, the articles that we're reading, why they don't make sense to a lot of us is because we do all this research and you know, and dedicated ourselves to this information. Here's something that I found interesting about this, though, is that you know as well as I do that if I get a lot of views on a YouTube channel, it's going to pay me a lot, right, on my YouTube video, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if I put out information that Google wants out there, they're going to pick up that video and they're going to spread it around, and I'm going to get a lot of money for that. So if I'm a good Googler and I'm putting out the information that Google wants out there, then I'm going to get rewarded and paid for that. You see what's happened here?
Mm-hmm.
Now, subconsciously, I don't know exactly what's happening, right? Because I'm just trying to make money. But yet, once you become aware of it, all of a sudden the money turns off and it's all gone, right? I
Yeah.
can go from 30,000 views down to 5,000 views, right? Because I'm no longer a good Googler, right? I recognize that I was putting out videos to try and get the attention, trying to be sensationalized, trying to do things that was, not necessarily in line with what it is that I was like researching and believing and stuff like that, but trying to be, I don't know, just trying to follow along with like what it was that I thought people would want to see, right? So I can see it. Like I can see how it is that most people get their information, even including myself, and then realizing that just because I was getting paid for it, that subconsciously I might have just been doing like being a proxy for Google,
Interesting.
And once I became aware of that, like I said, I became aware of it about a year ago, maybe even a little bit longer, that I really started focusing in on this, and I noticed it right away. Like the views really started falling, and unless I happen to hit on a really good topic or something, then the algorithm like recognized it or something. So
Here on my end, I go on my back end. I put up a very important video today. The title was 1 in 4 people have cancer and they don't know it. And very important video. I was talking to a doctor, cancer research doctor who sat on boards, performed countless amounts of surgery, all kinds of panels and stuff. And in the late 1970s, he went to like a cancer rally meeting, like a cancer forum to talk about it, right? And in the late 1970s, they were already projecting that by the year 2000, 1 in 10 people were going to get cancer. And they were building up, or they were kind of telling these young doctors to get into the cancer area of things because that's where the future was going to be by the year 2000. So he told me this almost in tears. He's in his 80s now, and he was telling me this. And he also told me that doctors today are actually are dissuading people if they go in for cancer testing or some sort of testing to not really mention it at all that they have cancer. Like just leave it alone, give them a prescription for something else, and avoid, especially in countries with socialized medicine like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, where we have socialized medicine where the governments don't want to pay out for cancer treatment. It's expensive. So now they're telling doctors to kind of, hey, maybe just sideline it, talk about something else or prescribe something else. So imagine you and your family going in and you're thinking you're sick with something, you don't know what it is. The doctor comes up, it's not cancer, you guys are good. It's just an infection, here's some medication. Then you pass away 2 weeks later from terrible cancer. And it's it was a very important video I put up today. I noticed after the video was put up, it reached 800 views within a couple of maybe 30, 40, 50 minutes. And then from just like this, it went up, went to 0. No one watching it. So they cut it off on the back end.
Wow.
So there was nobody. You could see live views. You know what I'm talking about, right, Simon? On the back end, you could see the live views per minute and per hour. It went to 0. Nobody's watching it. And I managed to get 170 comments in the first hour or 2 hours. And then they just shut it right off. And paragraphs, Simon, of people writing this long paragraphs. My aunt was diagnosed with cancer, and 3 weeks later she was dead. This, that, and everyone kind of pouring their hearts out. And then boom, they just close it right there. And you could see it. You could see the open door and then closed door. And that's what's happening in these socialized, I call it socialized internet we have here in Canada, because we're blanketed with so much censorship here. It's incredible. So
I myself, I try to not step on the toes of YouTube, right? While still trying to get the information out that I feel is, relevant to my studies and everything that I'm doing. I did a video where I titled it New World Orders, right? I wasn't talking about the New World Order. I was talking about New World Orders like manufacturing orders, right? And that video, and so like nothing within the video itself had anything to do with the New World Order. It literally had to do with manufacturing out of China. And that video got flagged because of that title. And then I got the like factual Wikipedia link, to what the New World Order is, so that, I wouldn't have misinformation in my video about it. And I'm thinking, wow, this like I tried to tread lightly, and this is what happened when I titled it New World Orders, right? Coming or depleting or something like that. I forget exactly how I titled it.
Mm-hmm.
So even like just barely scratching the surface of hitting anything controversial is like a big no-no. Like you can't do it, right? And so even when it comes to the stuff that I talk about, like you can't have a Federal Reserve speech and the words within it be controversial, right? I mean,
Wow.
this is straight up out of the Federal Reserve, so I can say whatever I want about it, right? I get to use it as much as I want, and I can say whatever I want about it. And if somebody was to try and say, hey, you got misinformation, it's just like, this is coming straight out of their own statements. I'm using it against them, true, right? Most people don't feel that way. They think I'm a shill for the Fed because they don't understand what I'm trying to do. But, when I'm sitting there telling people, it's just like, wait a minute here. They had a problem with a low inflation expectation. They've retrieved that problem, right? They've alleviated it. And now I've pretty much, not necessarily have gotten proof of it, but if you go down the timeline and you follow it, it's just like, it makes so much sense to me, like why we are in the position we are today. I mean, you think about it, so many people said that the Federal Reserve would never be able to raise rates, right? That the governments would crash and the housing market would crash and all this stuff would crash. I was one of them. I said it, right? As soon as the Federal Reserve started to raise rates, the housing market was supposed to crash. It didn't, right? Mortgage rates shot up here in the United States from historically low, 3% or whatever it was, to like 7%, practically overnight, like in the course of a matter of a few days, right? And then they plateaued out and they stayed there the entire time. Like they, up and down a little bit, went from 7 to like almost 8 or whatever, now below 7. But for the most part, it did not work in lockstep with the Federal Reserve and the raising of their Fed funds level. They were stepping it up every quarter, every time they had a meeting, but the mortgage rates just stayed right there. Why? Nobody could explain that. It's because what was taking place is that the Federal Reserve had conditioned the markets to be in a position in which that they were going to be the ones who were going to backstop the market, the mortgage market. And when those mortgage bonds started to fall to a price and started paying a yield that the investor looked at and said, man, that's my price right there, the mortgage market found support. Right. And this is really hard because it took me a while to figure this one out. Right. Because I was like, why the hell isn't the housing market should be crashing? Mortgages should be like, all this stuff should be taking place, but it's not happening. And it took me a minute to figure it out. Right. And that's really, if you think about it, like, OK, so imagine a pool of mortgage-backed securities, right? Because, for those who don't know what a mortgage-backed security is, it's a bond, right? It's as if you took a box, threw a bunch of mortgages in it, sold that box off to an investor. As the mortgages pay back their mortgages, the borrowers, the investor gets paid. So that box, that bond, that's called the mortgage-backed security, right? So now, if you can imagine a mortgage-backed security in the pool of mortgage-backed securities, that has a supply and demand just like anything else out there. There are investors who do want to buy those mortgage-backed securities, believe it or not, even though a lot of people will consider them toxic. But there are investors who do want to buy these things because they're a fixed income, right? Most of the time, people will pay their mortgages, and those things generally will pay their fairly safe income, right? So now, when you think about like the pool of mortgage-backed securities that exist out there, when you had low interest rates and you had a shitload of people who were rolling their old debts over into new debts, refinancing their mortgages, and they were borrowing new money, right, to buy houses, they were creating a lot of mortgage-backed securities, okay? Because every time they would refinance, they would cancel out the old debt and establish a new one, and that would rebuild a new mortgage-backed security that could then go into the pool of mortgage-backed securities for everybody to buy. The Federal Reserve happened to be one of these people, right? So this pool was huge. As people were buying houses and refinancing, this thing was gigantic, right? Now, when the interest rates rose, right, all of a sudden refinancing came to an end, right? People were like, no way, I'm not refinancing into a higher loan, right? Why would you do that? Doesn't make sense. So all of a sudden refinancing came to an end. These mortgages were no longer being created that could create the mortgage-backed securities, right? They turned off. But people said that's going to be, basically the Federal Reserve was going to be unloading mortgage-backed securities off their off their balance sheets. So they were going to be dumping into the pool of mortgage-backed securities, right? So this is where a lot of people were like confused about it, right? So what was going to happen is that the Federal Reserve was going to unwind their balance sheet, fill up this pool of mortgage-backed securities, but they didn't take into consideration that people were not going to be refinancing. And you also take into consideration that people really aren't buying homes now, so they're not creating a lot of new mortgages as to begin with. So this pool of mortgage-backed securities is actually getting quite small. You see what's happening here? Now, if you think about the supply and demand of investors who do want to buy into mortgage-backed securities, there are probably a lot more investors than people realize to the pool of mortgage-backed securities that now exist due to the fact that we have a diminished amount of new home sales and refinancing taking place to add to that pool. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. But now I want to bring.
Right. I don't know, man.
I want to bring this up. Hold on. I want to bring this up because I brought this up when I was on your channel, and I want to bring this up again. So you guys are sitting pretty in America, even if the rates go to, let's say, pretty high levels, because let's say they go to 7, 8, 9 points. You guys are still sitting pretty because the average benchmark, depending on what state you're in, sits at around 170 to, let's say, 340 to 400,000, okay? Let's just say, depending on what state. Some in Alabama, it's a lot less, and if you're in Mississippi, it's even lesser. If you're in Texas, it's kind of medium benchmark, and it's within reach, and it's within reach within me. And what do I mean within reach within me? It's because where I live in the two stoplights in my town, the average home is sitting at 470 to 790.
Wow.
Yeah, that's lower end homes. Okay, so the city I left 3 hours behind me, 3 hours west of me, the average 1-2 bedroom condo is going for $650 to $1 million. So you see where I'm going, and then the average home there that you could buy in Alabama for $90,000 is there in Vancouver, where I used to live, Burnaby, Surrey, the Lower Mainland, is starting at $1.7 million. So you guys are sitting pretty in America still. And I don't see a correction coming anytime soon unless you get to where we are at. Now, it's not just Canada that's at this level of housing, like the price of housing. Australia is there too. New Zealand is there too. And the United Kingdom is there too. They're all in this. America has an oversupply, a good, steady, strong oversupply of housing. And they have an abundance of housing, and you are wide open to, I don't want to deal with winter anymore, I'm moving to Florida. I don't want to deal with Florida and the hurricanes anymore, I want to move to Arizona, arid, dry. I want to move. You have choice. In Canada, we have 5 cities you could pick between, and they're all cold. Okay, and in Australia, you got 5 or 6 major cities to pick between, and they're all superly over expensive. And we got here where we are in Canada is because we are built off of money laundering. Our GDP is built off of housing and selling it to foreign investors. There's an incredible amount of fentanyl sales that are happening in Canada, and it's being redistributed and buying homes in Canada. They buy homes in Canada and leave them empty, creating artificial shortages that make homeowners wealthy on paper overnight. And now we're going into 15 plus years where no one could get, 13 plus years where people can't get into the markets here in Canada. And people have been sidelining now for 15 years, Simon. They're not open like you guys. Like, you get fed up where you are in Oregon. Heck, man, go down to somewhere rural Texas, 2 stoplights, $140,000 for a house. No one's going to bug you, right? In Canada, we do not have that opportunity in Canada. We're stuck between 5 cities. They're all cold, and everything. A house starts minimum 5 to 600,000 in the smaller cities, and the bigger cities, you're looking over $1 million to 1.7 million to start. So I just want you and your listeners on your end in America to know how lucky and grateful you guys should be, because you guys still have it. You're still sitting pretty there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I know a friend of mine. He picked up a house in Missouri for $32,000, and
Yep.
he said it wasn't a great house, but you could live in it. You know, it was enough that you could live in. And I thought, man, $32,000. There's like people who pay 3 times that much for a vehicle. And I think about how is it that really there is not how is it that housing is so expensive here, on the coast?
Amerifornia. Foreign money being parked into California, Oregon, and Washington State. When Vancouver put on their foreign buyers tax in 2017, I could bring up the article to show you guys. Chinese investors are fleeing Vancouver and heading to Seattle and Toronto, and blowing up the housing market overnight. When Vancouver put the foreign buyers tax on, that's it. Vancouver died that day. Well, it didn't die that day. It saw a runoff on investors going to Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, and we're talking overnight. Because if you look at Washington State, King County's housing prices in 2016, and then they passed that 270, 300,000 for the average home. Foreign investors, 1 year later, the average home was 800,000.
Yeah. Well, you can really see it. It's not only here on the West Coast, even just everywhere, even in my own town here. I mean, Astoria used to be a very working class town. Loggers, fishermen, rough, bars were rough, kind of a lot of divey kind of places. Now it's all trendy, it's all trendy places, trendy people, trendy restaurants, and that's cool. All right. It's a nice place to be. It's friendly and cool. But the houses around here are now incredibly expensive, stupid, ridiculously expensive. And the homeless count is picking up in a dramatic way, right? We have this huge separation between the rich and the poor taking place. And I think about this, I think about the gentrification. I think about the Cantillon effect on what's happening here. The investors who come in here, they come in with new money. When that new money starts pouring into the system, that's what separates the rich from the poor, And you start having more of the preferences and the desires of the property owners who have moved here, and they have come here with their cash, and they start driving up the land prices, the restaurant prices, everything that's around here. Well, it makes it very difficult for the working class to now exist. And you start having more homelessness. And once you have homelessness, you got a lot of depression, you got a lot of drinking and drug use. And then you do stuff make drugs legal. And it's not necessarily legal here in Oregon. They're just decriminalized, and that's a difference. But, they're not chased around anymore. So people just openly do them. So now you got depressed people who don't earn enough money to make a living around here, followed by a bunch of people who are living here who are basically driving up the prices of everything by indulging in luxuries. So, yeah, good times.
And
it's going to get worse,
And this is the Wagons East phenomena I've been talking about for years now. With the investing of foreign interests in your country or in your state or the coastal states, it's causing this Wagons East phenomena where you're seeing the people that can get out of those states are getting out, and that's the Wagons East phenomenon I've been talking about for years now, where people are going to your friend to Missouri and to other places to pick up property.
Kind of interesting. My buddy who did move to Missouri was really quite pumped about it. He actually just recently moved back. I asked him why. He says you couldn't make money in Missouri. There's no money there.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess if you have maybe an online job or something like that, but he said he's a hustler, right? So he's out there just constantly hustling and doing whatever, and you got to be in an area where money flies around. He says if you're not where money flies around, you can't hustle for it. You got to have your means. So he says there just wasn't any money in Missouri, so he had to move back.
Ask me how we do it up here in Canada.
I don't know, man.
Ask me.
How do you do it? I mean, I know how you do it, but
well, I'll tell you how we do it up here in Canada. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Public sector. The town I live in is 85% public sector, 6-figure incomes, And a lot of people don't know why they're making the money they make, and some of them don't even know what they do for the government. Six-figure incomes. And I made a video back in 2017. By 2025, Canada's going to be 70% public sector because the private sector just can't afford to eat.
Right.
So it's all public sector.
If I didn't have like, I mean, I think about it in my area, just my wife and I mean, she works for the school. I work, a regular I work at the lumber yard selling hardware and lumber and stuff like that. There's no way that we could live here. Not like this. I mean, not own a house and have cars and stuff like that. If it wasn't for YouTube and the side hustles and shit that I do, I mean, there's no way I would make it here. I would have been gone. Yeah.
Yeah, wagons east. You probably go maybe somewhere south where it's a bit warmer, eh? Like southeast, maybe just outside of Birmingham, Alabama. Maybe a little bit, maybe South Georgia.
Man,
Raleigh.
I don't know. I've lived here so long. I don't know what it would feel like to live anywhere else. I don't know. I've visited a lot of places, and there's a lot of places that I'd like to visit, but I don't know, man. It'd be hard to call any place else home.
Yeah, I hear you. Especially when you're rooted there, you're grounded there, your connections are there, you know everybody there. Yeah, I know how you feel. I know how you feel, bud. What else you got for us? Come on, you got something. Come on. I know Simon's always got something good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When I listen to and I read these articles out there, I really feel like, the credible threat theory is now alive and well. And if it isn't like playing out right now, I don't know what is. And that's really what I think I wanted to come out and just kind of share with you guys is that, as we sit here and we listen to the Federal Reserve, statements on the mainstream media, we have to take into consideration that this is trying to guide the markets. They are trying to give us an idea of what it is that they want us to react to. They are not doing anything. They haven't done anything at all, but yet you can see the markets are behaving in all kinds of ways. Think about it. Just earlier we were talking about the mortgage markets, right? The mortgage market actually started to move. The interest rates on mortgages started to move before the Federal Reserve did anything at all because they said that they were going to be raising interest rates and they were going to do it aggressively. That statement alone was enough to start getting the mortgage rates to move. This is the main policy tool that comes from the Federal Reserve, and we really have to look at this and understand it for what it is. Like, Ben Bernanke talked about this back in 2002, right? In a speech that he had given talking about deflation. And in this speech, he said that they knew that they were going to run into the lower bound, right? They knew they were going to hit zero and that the monetary policy was going to be ineffective at that point. And he said, but that's okay. They can still use their forward guidance, their words, their signaling. He wasn't using that exact thing. This is the terms that they use today. But he described it with a story of a guy who invents a gold machine. And with this gold machine, just imagination, right? But if a guy supposedly invents a gold machine, and with this gold machine, he can produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy, the moment that this information gets out to the markets, the price of gold would plummet. Even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold or even has the machine to do it, just the credible threat alone that it can be done would be enough to start moving those markets. And this is what we are experiencing today. So it's very important to understand this, right? Now, if you look at some of the statements coming from the Federal Reserve, even just recently, Michelle Bowman, who is a voting member of the FOMC, because remember, like Jerome Powell is just one member of the FOMC. He doesn't dictate what monetary policy is. He gets to vote on monetary policy and then gets to tell everybody about it. But he doesn't dictate what monetary policy is. It's down to a bunch of people, right? And so we look at that dot plot, and I believe it was 3 of the voting members believed that there was going to be a lowering of interest rates at the end of 2024. That's not all the members,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's just a couple. That's just a few of them who feel that way. Many of the other members don't. And Michelle Bowman, who is very vocal, very active, and very big at the Federal Reserve, just 2 weeks ago in her speech said that it is of her belief that they will be needing to raise interest rates going into the future in order to make sure that that they can combat their inflation target. So That's what I listen to, not the mainstream media, because that's the credible threat, right? That's where they're trying to guide us, right? And that stuff isn't fake. It's not lies,
Hmm.
right? And it's factual stuff that they are telling us, but it's a guiding. It's gaslighting for the most part, right? They're allowing us to believe in a certain fashion and not correcting us, right? But if you read these speeches, they're telling a much different story, especially considering some of the issues that was taking place prior to the pandemic and now that a lot of this stuff has been solved.
But do you agree that the pandemic came at perfect timing? I believe this. I believe the pandemic was definitely staged because of the economic problems we were facing, and the worldwide media was spinning it as climate emergency when the whole world was protesting no confidence in government. Now, Simon, if you get if you get a few minutes, go to my YouTube channel. Go to that little, that little magnifying glass where you search across that specific channel. Search across and type in "pull the trigger on pandemic" and see what we were saying in 2017 and 2018. We did a mic in the night in mid 2019 where the whole world was protesting. Chile was protesting, and Chile was going through major economic problems. Major. Argentina was protesting. They went already on 3 resets. Argentina, 3 resets from zero in the last 10 years. So,
Right.
breaking this down, like the whole world was protesting. Nigeria was protesting. Haiti was protesting. France was protesting the Gilets jaunes because there were austerity measures and they were cutting people's pensions. Hong Kong was protesting no confidence in government. It was one after another in 2019, and I wholeheartedly, truly believe that they had to pull the trigger on this pandemic. It also kind of put a damper on this whole economic thing that you're talking about, put a damper in keeping governments in place for much longer and create this mail-in ballot system that they did all this BS. Now, what's your take on that? I know it's a tough question. It's a tough statement, but
Yeah, because there's so many angles that went down there, like all that protesting and everything that went on, right? This is the crisis. The pandemic was the crisis,
mhm.
right? This is the unusual and exigent circumstance. So now this is a funny thing to think about because the unusual and exigent circumstance. This gave the Federal Reserve and the Treasury unusual and exigent circumstance powers, right? Powers
Mhm.
that they would have had it not been for the pandemic. Now, they might have been able to say if there was a war, or maybe if there was a major economic event that was due to, like, say, environmental catastrophe or something like that. But this was due to a pandemic.
Mhm.
All right. Unusual and exigent circumstance takes place. Now, if you go and you look at this speech prior to the pandemic, right,
Mhm.
had 3 main global trends appear to the account of the decline in the neutral interest rate over the quarter century. One is demographics. Now, this is the problem that the Federal Reserve had. The
Mhm.
first one was populations are aging as people live longer and birth rates have fallen. Huh, very interesting. After the pandemic, you think, I mean, I'm not one to talk about the deaths or anything like that because I didn't look at anything. I didn't study anything on the COVID. I didn't look at deaths. I didn't care about any of that stuff. But people told me that a lot of people died because of that, right? So populations were aging, and that was one of their issues that they had. Right? Now, the second, productivity growth was slowing around the world. Right? Well, they just cut productivity all down to shit. And now, what do we have?
Mhm.
We have a new transferring of global growth happening all around the world as people are redistributing their manufacturing base to cheaper places,
Mhm.
right? So now we're going to have global growth taking place again as soon as this whole shit's over again. And then the third was the demand for safe and liquid assets, which had made a wider wedge between safe yields on government debt
Mhm.
and riskier assets like corporate bonds. Now, this one's really difficult to understand. These were 3 major problems that were taking place. People were too old. Global growth had slowed down dramatically because, I mean, the easiest way for me to try and explain that one is for people is like, say you want to start a business, but you can't start a business because everybody out there already has that same business going on. You can't grow into this because it's already existing, right? Global growth had slowed down dramatically. Well, once you had the pandemic, all that stuff got hacked. Production came down to nothing. There was like huge depletions of inventory everywhere. And then there was this redistribution of manufacturing bases around the world. That was one of the problems that was fixed from this. Again, this is 2018. And then that last one, right? This one is really weird, really hard to think about. Assets like the safe and liquid assets like U.S. Treasuries and government debt was too wide, right? And now, for me, this was kind of hard for me to try and understand like what the difference was, but that the demand going into safe and liquid assets drove the yields down on it so low, right? That the corporate debt now sitting as high as it is, when the Treasury or when the Federal Reserve goes to stimulate the economy by buying treasuries, they were no longer effectively able to stimulate the corporations because people would not be going into it because of that wider wedge, right? If you had it closer there and you dropped the yields on the U.S. Treasuries, it would drive people into the corporate debts.
Right.
Okay. This is like, if you were to create a situation in which that gap widened, people would be more encouraged to go to the corporate debt. But if that wedge is already widened, you can't widen it anymore. Mm-hmm. All right. This is a problem that the Federal Reserve was facing. Now, this is where it gets really complicated if this isn't complicated enough. All right. The unusual and exigent circumstances of the pandemic gave the Treasury and the Federal Reserve the ability to set up what is referred to as a special purpose vehicle. The special purpose vehicle is an entity that is separated from the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. They used a special purpose vehicle to fund corporations. They called it the Corporate Debt Lending Facility. They funded it with hundreds of billions of dollars. Literally, it was like $600 billion, right? Mm-hmm. Some ungodly amount. Then the news media went out there that they were going to be buying corporate debt. People flipped out. I know, I was one of them, right? I said, man, the Federal Reserve is going to be buying corporate debt. Look at this. This is incredible. They can't do this. This is illegal. You can't be doing this, right? And so the Fed said, hey, we're not picking the winners and losers. We're buying the fallen angels, right? And so there was this big media play about this special purpose vehicle, the hundreds of billions of dollars that went into it. It would never have existed if it wasn't for the, unusual and exigent circumstances. And people started flipping out, and they started front running the Federal Reserve. They started buying into the corporate debt because they're going to buy this stuff before the Federal Reserve has a chance to do it. All of a sudden, there's this huge demand for corporate debt. Right? People are looking for a place to try and park money anywhere. U.S. Treasuries are essentially at zero. The Federal Reserve has basically given everybody permission to buy corporate debt because they promised that they were going to be doing it. So there was this huge run into corporate debt. These corporations start gorging on incredibly cheap corporate debt, right? All these junk bonds are trading closer and closer to the U.S. Treasury yields, right? As everybody's trying to get into this stuff. At the end of the day, the Federal Reserve didn't buy any. They didn't buy any. They bought a little bit to establish a credible threat. The market stepped in thinking that they were front running the Federal Reserve. They basically bailed out all these corporations, and at the end of the pandemic, they shut down the special purpose vehicle, took all the money, put it back into, their coffers or wherever it goes, and they never did buy any corporate debt to begin with. They were able to get the markets through that credible threat of the special purpose vehicles to bail out the corporations. Now we have a lot of these corporations, the fallen angels anyway, who's sitting on a lot of cash while watching the zombie corporations suffer and die right now. And they should. They're not suffering and dying. They're just suffering and dying because they have to lay off a bunch of people, so they suffer. But ultimately, they're clearing out the debt undergrowth right now, and they're hacking the heads off of zombies. The corporations who borrowed heavily during that time when they were able to gorge on that incredibly cheap debt and they're sitting on cash now are able to get through the hard times without having too much of a worry. This is how they did it, man. They bailed out. See, this is why they don't have to worry about a recession right now because they already bailed everybody out.
All right, I want to ask you this because last week was our 7th annual prediction show where people call in and give their predictions. And I know you're not a prediction guy. Every time I ask you for your predictions, you don't have any predictions for us. But today, What can you predict for 2024? We're not going to hold you to it. We just want to know what you think 2024. What do you see for 2024 prediction-wise? Go.
All right, you want my biggest prediction, the one that nobody's talking about. This is it, and this is actually one that the Treasury has talked about. Now, my prediction is that the Treasury, and it's not even like I said, it's not even my prediction, but it's one that nobody really talks about, but the Treasury does. The Treasury is going to be buying back their own debt, right?
Right.
They're going to buy back their own bonds at some point. Like people say that the Federal Reserve is going to step in and that they're going to be, going back into quantitative easing and stuff like that when there's all of a sudden the liquidity issues start to manifest itself. That's not going to happen. It's going to come from the bond. It's going to come from the Treasury itself. They are going to buy back their own bonds, and that's something that I don't think a lot of people are prepared or even have like have even conceptualized. Right. So there's going to be liquidity crisis. Liquidity crisis in 2024. Couldn't tell you if it's going to be at the beginning, middle, probably not towards the end, but it's probably going to happen more towards the middle, I would assume. But it's very difficult for me to time these things because I always think they're happening faster than they really do. So once I kind of see these things, I think, okay, now they're happening right now, but they're not. They're grinding very slowly. So I do predict that there's going to be liquidity crisis. Now, this liquidity issue is going to be due to the fact that the Federal Reserve is going to continue their quantitative tightening, right? And we can see it really happening right now. People are flipping out about the repo market, right? But we have to understand that the Federal Reserve had switched from a limited reserve system into an abundant reserve system, and that's why the repo facility became so prevalent after 2019, is because before that the Federal Reserve was operating in a different fashion in order to establish their Fed funds rates. This is, again, it's a lot of this stuff is really esoteric and deep in thought and kind of you have to really understand the banking system to get it. But ultimately, the limited reserve system was when the Federal Reserve would establish their Fed funds rate on the overnight lending between the big banks. And so at the end of the day, some of the banks would be in need of reserves. Some of them would have excess reserves. The ones who were in need of reserves would borrow from the ones with excess reserves. That overnight lending rate was the effective fund rate. If the Federal Reserve needed to adjust that, they would buy and sell reserves, treasuries off the big banks to adjust that level so that the overnight lending rate would land within the effective fund rate, right? Would land within their target. Since then, that was the limited reserve. They moved into an abundant reserve system because they had all this quantitative easing and all this damn money flying everywhere. And they couldn't really use the overnight lending rate at these big banks because all the big banks were sitting on abundant reserves. They didn't need to borrow from each other anymore, right?
Well, they didn't trust each other in the first place.
Well, I mean, it's I mean, a matter of trust is all a matter of how much interest rate you're going to end up paying, right? And so, and that's if you don't trust, the interest rate goes up, right? And that's what it comes down to, is that in September of 2019, there was a huge tax payment that had taken place, and it took a bunch of cash out of the big banks and it sent it over to the Treasury General account, which is an account at the Federal Reserve. So all this cash left the big banking system and it went over to the Federal Reserve, over to the Treasury General account. That left the big banks without enough cash. And that overnight lending rate shot up to 10% because they just didn't have enough cash to lend to each other.
Right, to cover their debts.
To have the operation for the next day, right? If you don't have enough to
balance. It's balancing. It's a balancing act.
It's a balancing act. It really is. If you can imagine, treasuries are almost as good as cash, right? So I could use my treasuries like they're cash. But not always can you use treasuries to settle a debt, right? You actually have to have the cash in order to close the debt out. So having cash is different. It's like the lubrication for the banking system. So without enough cash in there, everything freezes up because you can't necessarily use treasuries in the same fashion, right? So this is really what happened. The Federal Reserve then stepped up and says, oh, hell no, give us the treasuries. We'll give you cash. This is the overnight lending that we're going to do, the repo, the non-QE, QE, right? So this was the overnight repo facility or basically became a standing repo facility. After that, it wasn't shortly too long, right? The pandemic kicks in, all the other stuff, quantitative easing, and they move into an abundant reserve system, right? So this is really what we're working away from now as the quantitative tightening takes place, is that they're removing the cash out of the system, and it's eventually going to leave the repo facility, right? And it's going to move back over and into a limited reserve system and be back at these big banks where they'll be lending to each other on an overnight basis. I mean, they do lend to each other on an overnight basis now, but the way the Fed establishes the Fed funds rate is between the repo facility and then another account called interest on excess reserve. So when the big banks don't have any other place to put money, there's an account at the Federal Reserve that barely pays them anything at all. And between the repo and the excess reserves, they can channel the Fed funds rate. And this is all changing. I mean, we're going to find that this is going to be moving back to the big banks. And people are flipping out about the repo facility right now. And I'm thinking, it is a big deal, but is it really? You know?
Simon, I'm going to make you laugh.
Okay.
Because you brought up the repo market thing, and I took a note here from a month ago. YouTube took down my repo. I have it here in the notes. Repo market wars out of control. A video I made in 2019, April of 2019, and it was taken down for medical misinformation. Yep. Yeah.
That is funny. It doesn't have anything to do with medical at all.
No, I got videos from 2012, 2014, 2016 taken down for medical misinformation that have nothing to do. It's all economic money laundering, Chinese gangs, fentanyl, all kinds of stuff. Has nothing to do with medical. But I'm actually compiling a list of the top. I'm getting almost to 100 videos removed for medical misinformation, and 98% of them are before 2019.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's incredible, man. I mean, you know, I'm glad I kind of stuck to what I did with my channel, because I don't know what I would, dude. I would be so brokenhearted, you know, if they were just like removing videos like that from me. Like, I mean, for as hard as you work and as much as you do to put out this information and stuff like that, you know, it would be like that would be devastated to have 100 videos removed from my channel. You know, that sucks.
Yeah, that's just for medical misinformation. We're not, because I just had a 5,000 video special. Thank you to my subscribers. I did last week, where I had 5,000. I'm at 5,000 according to YouTube. It's 5K videos, right? So I did a 5,000 video special, thanking everybody all these years and all that. And it's kind of funny. The next day they took down 3 more videos that put me down back to 4,997. so every other week I could do a 5,000 video special. When they remove videos and I upload a few, then they'll remove a few. You know what I'm saying? So,
and here we are again doing a 5.
So anyways. Any last words, buddy? We've been going at this for an hour. I'm gonna let you go in. You look pretty cold.
Or yeah, cool. I'm just hanging out here. Well, I got an electric jacket on, so I ain't that cold.
Oh.
Yeah, these things are super sweet, man. I love them. No, I mean, I don't know. I could ramble on all day about all kinds of stuff, but I think that was probably like, you know, talking about that credible threat theory, getting that stuff out, you know, kind of talking about what's happening with the mainstream media, and when you're listening to the Federal Reserve, just understand that almost everything that is being said on the mainstream is the credible threat. It is the job owning. It is the forward guidance, the signaling, the stuff that they want you to know about. Their speeches, which are not exactly easy to get through, are much more telling, though. If you read through those speeches, which, you know, you can just find in Google Federal Reserve speech, and you can go right to the Federal Reserve site and get them. They're telling us straight up that things, they told us ahead of time that things were bad. They're telling us now on, you know, what it is that they plan on doing. And one of the things that I think a lot of times, and I'll just kind of let it go with this, is that we hear, like, you know, they're going for like this 2% target. They're not. They're going for a 2% average inflation rate over time. And this is, again, like something that they don't talk about in the mainstream. When you hear them talk about it, it's always about a 2% target. But if you listen to their speeches, if you listen to their words, and you go back and you look at, like, say, for example, this is the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco economic letter. This was written January 10th of 2022. So, you know, this thing isn't even that old, right? And in this, they talk about how the average inflation rate, let me see, they have changed the way they have done it, and I can't remember exactly where it is in here. but they talk about inside of this letter about how they have switched from moving to a 2% target to a 2% average inflation rate over time. Not only does it say it in this speech, but it also says it in a Federal Reserve speech given by Jerome Powell, talking about the monetary policy. And again, moving it to an average inflation rate over time. And this is really difficult to try and wrap our heads around because they don't give us a mathematical formula for the average inflation rate over time. They don't have any kind of set, like, how do you look at this? Like, there's no website to go to, there's no graph to look at. So now it really becomes arbitrary to the Federal Reserve. Like when they say, okay, we have reached our 2% average inflation rate over time, right? So now when it comes to inflation coming down to the 2% target, which typically the Federal Reserve would want to adjust their interest rates to maintain that 2% target, that's not what they're going to do, right? Because they're going for an average inflation rate over time. So once it hits the target, it doesn't mean that the Fed is going to be adjusting their monetary policy, right? Their Fed funds rate. This is something very critical. We don't know exactly how they're going to adjust it or what they're going to adjust it to, but they're shooting for an average inflation rate and not a target.
Okay.
So this is also important to remember. All right. So I'm going to leave it at that. That's all. Like, I just bombarded you with too much stuff tonight.
No,
So
it's good. Our viewers, it's good to get a recap from you. Come on and update us on where things are headed in a financial, where things are headed financially, whether it's through banking, whether it's through the Fed, whether it's through, because it affects the Commonwealth. So if America goes ahead and raises, let's say America does 3 rate hikes consecutively, Canada will follow in suit, New Zealand, and then Australia, and then the UK last. That's just how it happens. That's just how the chain of events happens across the Commonwealth. Because right now we have people live in New Zealand. We have people right now in Australia. We have people that I could see here from Ireland. So we got quite a few people from all over the Commonwealth. And America kind of takes the lead on rate. If they decide to rate, if they pivot in lower rates, then you'll start to see Canada and everywhere else kind of follow suit. So thanks for your updates, information. Guys, this is Uneducated Economist. You can find him on YouTube. He's not hard to find. He's everywhere. It's Simon. Thank you so much, Simon, for hitting me up today.
You bet, Mike. Well, thanks for letting me come on and share some of the stuff that I've researched and come across and some of my theories. I mean, I really appreciate it. I want to share this stuff because I think it's really important. I think it's very different from what a lot of other people are saying out there.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's nuggets, right? This is nuggets of information that we all have to collect for ourselves. Just like when we're doing the research out there, when you're picking up these pieces, like the stuff that I was talking about tonight, these are little pieces of information. And when you start piecing it all together for yourself, you can really start forming the right decision. We just intuitively just start making the right decision when we do this, right?
Okay.
And so, it's important. And, I don't know what else to say, man, but thank you.
All right, Simon. God bless you, and have a good night. We'll see you. Have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next year. Okay.
Merry Christmas.
God bless.
God bless.
All right, folks. An unscheduled, uneducated economist. I went upstairs just before I jumped in the shower, and I got a message on Skype, and I'm like, "Oh, it's Simon." He's like, "Hey," he says, "Good evening, sir. Want to talk tonight?" I'm like, "Oh, you betcha, man." And I'll be honest with you guys. I didn't really set too much up for tonight's show. I didn't. I went to hockey at 7 a.m. with my kids. Then I went to work at my store. And then I had a church dinner. So I got like 40 minutes to set the show up. And when he messaged me, I was so happy. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Yeah, what an epic call. That's right, Dano. Epic call. Absolute epic. And guys, don't forget to, if it's okay with you guys, share this on other platforms. Thank you, Dr. Mysterio, for sharing this on your Truth Social.